It's beard time, you know.
Okay, so maybe we'll do. So again, we're just going to do a short class today,
Okay.
and we have class next week.
Yeah, is next week the 29th?
The 29th is next week.
Okay,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
so we have class next week in our normal time and place, 10:30 to noon, and at the people come in person, it'll be in the Gompa at
Okay.
LMB. And I just wanted to, talking with Tyler, I messed up our schedule. I didn't realize I was gone 3 Sundays in a row. So I thought maybe better just to try and do something, a little check-in today.
Sure.
And and then we'll continue. And also, so Tyler, myself, and Leah were talking about the future as well. I think we'll have a break and then we'll see how people feel and start up again another series, probably end of August, something like that. In that one, I'm becoming a little more encouraged to maybe we'll take on another, or we will take on another of Lam Yeshe's publications. And I'm not sure which one, we have to discuss that, but maybe a little bit more a formal discussion. So we'll talk about that. If people actually have requests, I mean, we can people have requests. Like some things I'm thinking of. There's a new book out by Lama by Wisdom Publications. I can't remember the title right now. I just got it last week. Then we have things like Introduction to Tantra, which might be interesting. Maybe that's a little bit too advanced right at the beginning, but then we have anyway, all kinds of books. And again, I want to just call out to John Landau down there in the bottom, or in my screen at the bottom, who worked on most of these, a lot of these texts with Lam Yeshe. So he should probably be teaching them anyway, not me. Um, so again, we're going back to this. Just, you know, is that showing up is that reversed? It's so funny because when I look at it, it's backwards. So freedom through understanding. And last week we talked a bit about the nature of the relative mind, ego and attachment. So what I thought, what we talked about briefly was that uh, let's see, I'm just trying to find the attachment and ignorance produce many misconceptions in our life. So, for example, we often think this is Lama Yeshe's, this is Lama Yeshe. This is good. This makes me happy. But if we investigate a little further, we'll find that such thoughts are misconceptions, that the things we think make us happy actually cause suffering. And then we had the example, he gave the example of Evil Knievel. And remember, people know what Evil Knievel is? It was? Yeah. And so, within terms of Buddhist psychology, we're turning everything kind of around, aren't we? And so, with this approach, with the approach, of course, the topic, the aim is the same aim as why we do everything, and it's about getting comfortable with the fact that why we do everything is, in a simplified way, a very simplistic way, is to be happy. And of course, this is something that the foundation, again, I've said it a number of times in this class, when we think about what Shakyamuni Buddha, after 7 weeks after he attained full awakening, and didn't teach, right? He just remained silent. And you think about that. And it's because what we say in words is like Krishnamurti. I don't know if people are familiar with Krishnamurti. You say, the sign is not the destination, right? So words are not the thing. But the only way we can really communicate with each other, not the only way, but the primary way we communicate is through our words, right? So what becomes sort of what becomes essential in Buddhist practice or any spiritual practice, probably we could say, is the demarcation of when something is merely conceptual in words and when one is something, and when then it becomes experiential. So, Lama Yeshe and all the lamas, all the great teachers are very concerned, or their emphasis is on our experience, right? So, in terms of, in particular, the Lama Yeshe's, I think, emphasis, at least in this book and in most of what you read or receive from Lama is his determination that we experience the nature of the mind itself. So when we look at, so to do that, we really have to have the techniques and equipment and the method to do it. So it's not just a matter of looking at the mind. So when we think about Shakyamuni Buddha's 7 week silence and then coming out of the silence with declaring the teachings and the four, well, typically referred to as the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths, which is the truth of suffering, right? The truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of nirvana or release, freedom, and the truth of the path. That's what he taught first. And as I often say, and I've said in this class, it seems confusing. Why didn't he teach the truth of nirvana first, like be encouraging, instead of the truth of suffering? And again and again and again, this word suffering is like a sign. It's not the destination. So the word suffering actually doesn't clearly articulate the experience of suffering. The cause of suffering, the second noble truth, doesn't capture the essence of what is the experience of the cause of suffering. The truth of freedom or nirvana does that, those words, and that's where we get hung up on. We stick on the words, okay? At least I do. And then the truth of the path. So which is fourth noble truth. Or now the noble truths, just to clarify one thing, this is very interesting. I didn't know this for many years. Why they're referred to as noble is not so much because they're so noble. It's kind of noble is kind of an unusual word for us to use, right? The reason they have the name no, like the Four Noble Truths, is actually the correct translation, I guess I could say, or articulation would be the four truths for a noble being. Okay? This is really, really important because if we think that these are, okay, so these are truths for a noble being. And here, noble doesn't mean some sort of royalty or elite status in that sense. Noble refers to someone who has actually, I mean, technically speaking, noble refers to a person who has had direct insight into reality, shunyata, emptiness. So if you think about when I sit and I meditate or study the Four Noble Truths, and I don't have insight into reality, what is it that I'm studying? Right? What is it that I'm studying? What is it that I'm meditating on? What is it that I'm contemplating? So, what we're meditating and contemplating on in those times is I could say merely conceptual. Okay, it's conceptual. It's like what we do with any study. If we're studying whatever, you know, I don't know, anything we study, it's all done with conception, isn't it? So often Lama Yeshe refers to the difference between a professor of Buddhism and someone who is an experience like a lama or a teacher because defining one of the primary defining characteristics is it's not enough to say I'm Buddhist. It doesn't really mean anything. Because you say you're Buddhist doesn't mean you're Buddhist, by the way. And when we get down fundamentally, what determines someone as Buddhist or in this say a spiritual seeker is uh is it's the experiential aspect of these concepts. So we know probably a lot of people, and because I'm a Virgo, I think I'm critical, right? So that I listen and I hear people and we talk about Buddhism and these ideas. And I mean, just to be honest, so often what's missing is the experiential aspect. And there's nothing wrong with having this. I mean, first we need, we talk about study. The first thing in developing really is you listen. They call listening, which means hearing the teachings or reading them. then contemplating, which means mulling them over, thinking, getting more in the depth of the intellectual, conceptual part, and then meditating. So meditation means experiencing. And that doesn't mean sitting on a cushion necessarily. You can be walking, you could be running, you could be with friends, you could be going, whatever, but it's an experiential. So, in a way to say that we're not really being very sincere until we put ourselves to the test of experience. Okay. So, in the context of Lama Yeshe, a lot of the thrust of Lama Yeshe's approach is that uh, the object to experience is the mind itself. Okay. So, and of course, he doesn't mean only that, but the meditator, when the meditator, okay. So I think that Lama was very, very, very extremely skillful in instructing Westerners or foreigners, modern people, to first meditate on the mind. Okay. It wasn't meditating on compassion. I'm not saying I don't mean this in a universal totalizing sense, but a lot of times what I felt from Lama was he was very adamant that we meditate on the internal. And that means if the topic is love, compassion, the precious human rebirth, death and dying, very often we meditate on those as concepts. So I would say that that's not meditation necessarily. I would say it's more contemplation. Okay. And with contemplation, there's not necessarily a shift in the mind. Okay. It helps. Of course, we have to contemplate first. We have to understand the ideas. But if you take a topic like death and dying, uh, you know, and we talk about like often there's the outline of meditating on that death is definite. And then that has three parts or three sub bullets to that or bullet points to that. And then the second point is the time of death is indefinite. So we contemplate that. And the third, and that has three bullet points. And the third is that the only what helps. Well, the only thing that helps is a spiritual foundation. So when we're dying, what helps? Okay. So what happens, it seems, is we have those outlines or these ideas for contemplation, but the meditator, see, the meditator is not at her point, at that point, when she's becoming um, identified with that outline, then then the contemplating of it should lead to the experience of it. And the experience of it is non-conceptual. And this is where it feels so many of us have a very hard time taking that leap. I think that has somewhat to do with it has a lot to do with our training as, you would go all through school. Everything we do really has, I mean, in terms of learning, well, not everything. I mean, we can make a separation, but our formal study is all conceptual. Very often it's not about experiential. But we do experience. I mean, when we think about, um, when we do different sports, athletics, or when the concept of like going like running, certain point you hear that people just get into a zone, right? Or other sports, or other activities like that, or going for a walk in the woods. You're thinking maybe that, and all of a sudden you just sort of absorb into the experience itself. You get into the zone. So I don't know why, but somehow with meditation, this idea is not really explained clearly. So when with Lama Yeshe's approach, when okay, so I'd like to ask you, and you might not, you probably won't remember, and I will remember to ask, but what I'd like, what I'd like to encourage you to do is meditate on the nature of meditate on what's happening in your mind. So you go internal, not right at the moment. But the process is that you experience what your mind is like. And then all the concepts within Buddhist theory and Buddhist practice apply in that moment almost when you're meditating on the nature of your mind. So, in other words, that experience of the mind, okay, so you think the concept of of uh, of suffering, okay? So you meditate this suffering, that suffering, suffering of change, the suffering of pain, the suffering of loss, the suffering of not getting what you want, the suffering of longing, all those, the suffering of losing what you got. Um, so you know, but when you meditate and get into and you go to the direct experience of the nature of the mind in that moment, and you have these thoughts coming up and these concepts, and maybe you feel uncomfortable, or maybe you're tired, or that is exact. And you watch the mind and you think, oh, my mind's really unclear. I need to get clearer. So that's the nature of suffering, right? That is that thing about not being satisfied. Two things. One is that quality of the mind is unclear. That is considered suffering in Buddhist concept. Then there's a part of, okay, now get out of the unclarity, develop a really focus, and you can't do it. That's nature suffering. So when the point is that then you're experiencing the teaching itself, and it's non-conceptual. Does that make sense? And the same with all the topics, death and dying. So when you start meditating, okay, death is definite, death is definite, so conceptual. But there comes a point when when you look at the mind itself and you notice that the mind has the opposite perspective. The default mode is that I'm not going to die. But non-conceptually. I mean, of course, to have that at a conceptual level is important first. But that's not the realization. What the realization is, we experience the nature of the mind that's arising at that moment as being fixed, that I'm not going to die. We have that every second fact. Or being seduced by the view of permanence. It's very similar to death is definite. We see everything as not as lasting, even in conceptually, right? Conceptually, we can all have we can all study, debate, discuss how nothing lasts, right? The reason we have that discussion, the reason we have that teaching is not, a lot of times we just stay there and we think, yes, now I have a Buddhist practice, but that's not it, because that won't last. That won't sustain you. As soon as things get rough, you know, you don't want to know anything about the fact that things are permanent or impermanent, right? It's like, uh, yeah, you're not interested. But when the mind itself touches what I've called the myth of permanence, okay? When it touches it and you have a direct perception that we see everything as permanent, okay? That is then where you focus the mind on that experience, and that's meditation. And when the mind is wobbly, you're not so good at it, which is why we do the training things like watching the breath or whatever, to help focus the mind. Um, does that make sense? Does anyone anything, any ideas, questions?
Karuna, I have a question. Is it kind of like an opposites attract type of thing? Like when you're not focused on it, it comes, and when you're focused on it, it's a little elusive.
Definitely, right? That, yeah, it can depend. Do you have an example for you when that happens?
Yeah, and just hearing you talk about that right now, how, when you have the realization of the permanence or the thought or the concept of it, then all of a sudden that's your starting point. Like I feel
Yeah.
like if I'm jumping too far ahead and trying to conceptualize one of these topics or realizations, I find myself very like far in between that. And so it seems harder for me to get there. Um, I'm kind of wrapping myself around this thought, but um,
Well,
I think just
uh,
starting where I am has been really helpful, and it helps me get closer to a realization.
I think that why Buddha started with the truth of suffering is highlights what you're saying. It's we have to know that we see things as permanent. We
Hmm.
have to know that we see things as happiness when they're not, right? We
Hmm.
have to know that we see things as eternal when in fact death happens. We have to know that we see our lives as miserable with low self-opinion of ourselves when actually this life is amazing and miraculous.
Right.
See, we have to know, so we have to know, yes, we have to know, I guess you could say the opposite, right?
Hmm.
And become, now remember we talked about the definition of meditation is to become familiar, right? And so it does mean, so one thing is the conceptual permanence, or death is definite, but it's another when you touch it, right? And the way to touch it, which is then experience, and then experience leads to realization. Okay, as the mind becomes, even experiencing for a short period can be a realization because of it. What they often say that the hallmark of realization is that it actually begins to transform your mind. So, if one really has, like, it's like people have a near-death experience, right? And then all of a sudden, I mean, that's an experience, and then it transforms their lives. You often hear that. Or other things with illness, for example, cancer survivors, things like that, and then it transforms their lives. So that's the experiential. And so that's the way I would think of it. Is that kind of what you meant? Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. So we want to get to experience is the thing. So I think that sort of the maybe the message to take away here. So the experience that we're going to have is not going to be so pleasurable necessarily. We know it's not going to be, we got to go into the experience of our default mode and learn how we really are. And yes, it can be really shocking, and it can be depressing because you think, well, how do I get out of this? Yes, I always do this. Yes, I've been this way my whole life. My mind has been like this. My mind, yes, I agree with you. My mind is miserable. You know, it's a rather it's a bit of a distressing place to be because if you don't have the method to get out of it or the alternative, then you just wallow. I mean, it's not. I used to say that um, that with your mother, it's not helpful. Well, this is my mother anyway. It wasn't helpful for me to teach her about the nature of her mind and suffering and all this sort of thing and death is coming and all because I didn't have anything to give her to replace it. I mean, I had my concepts, but not something that she could identify with. So when she spent time, the few times she was with Lama Yeshe, they talked about cooking and orchids and you know, things that uplifted her mind because that was the level and to make a connection with him, I guess. Because that's so it's meeting people where they're at, right? Um, yeah, and like as we say, if you meet a beggar along the road, don't teach philosophy, right? Give him some food, right? I'll just reread this. I think I read it last week. Attachment and ignorance produce many misconceptions in our life. How? For example, we often think, this is good, this makes me happy. But if we investigate a little further, we find that such thoughts are misconceptions, that the things we think make us happy actually cause suffering. Okay. I mean, in one way, what we do is completely different, but from another point of view, it's exactly the same. Why? Through misconception, we do things that bring us suffering, but cling to them as wonderful causes of happiness. Check up on the things you do, physically and mentally. You'll see what I'm saying is true. Perhaps it will be clearer if I give an example from our own experience. We're always attached to food, aren't we? As a result, we eat with greed and our stomach is often upset. This comes from attachment. It's very common. Actually, people think that food should preserve body and life, but eating with ignorance turns nourishment into poison and kills us. Everybody knows this. Check up. Why do most people die? It's because they eat things that finish up killing them. If you really look into it, you nearly always find that the person made some mistake or other. What I'm saying is simple, but you have to realize it more deeply. It's not just an idea. If the meditation you do is just an idea, if you're simply on some kind of trip, then it's not worthwhile. Proper meditation scientifically demonstrates the reality of your nature, your relative nature. This is well worth knowing. When you know the nature of your own mind, how your mind torments you, how it brings you suffering, your mind can then cooperate with your life. Most of the time, our mind does not cooperate with our life. As a result, we don't know what's going on in our life. Look at the Western world in particular. We're too involved in objects of sense gratification attachment. We over exaggerate the importance of the sense world. Anyway, such that it's constantly exploding in front of us. The way we're brought up, we automatically believe that the external world brings us happiness. It's true, check up. Perhaps we don't assent to this intellectually, but if we look more deeply into our mind, we'll see that that's what we believe. This misconception is deeply rooted in our consciousness. I'm not talking about something intellectual. Forget about the intellect. Forget about the intellectual. Just penetrate more deeply into your own mind and investigate your lifelong beliefs, what you think is best for you and what you think is not. Everybody holds to such beliefs. Don't think, I'm not like that. I just go with the flow. That's not true. Don't think, I have no fixed ideas. The nature of attachment is such that you always have fixed ideas of what is best for you. This is me, therefore this is best. Check up on your this is me. Okay. So all that again about is experiential, right? It's experiential meaning to learn about the mind. So when Lama talks about attachment to this and that, it's really a matter of just sitting and watching how the mind works. Okay, now so today, it's always the same mind, in that sense, but you just apply different formulas to it. So one day the formula is, does my mind, here I am sitting here in this moment, am I locked into the conception of permanence? And you watch, not judge. You just watch. Oh yeah. And you learn about how the mind perceives everything as permanent. Then another day or another meditation, you meditate on what Lama is saying about uh, the mind sees everything is pursuing happiness all the time. And you watch what the mind, it does, it's like a microcosm. Each instant, each moment of mind, it doesn't matter what's arising. The entire teachings are embedded in that moment. Okay. Even the enlightened part. Embedded in that moment is the emptiness of that concept too, the emptiness of that thought. So that's the nirvana part. So the nirvana, the freedom is also there each moment. It just is a matter of what you're going to use in that moment to continue training our mind to become awakened. And the why Buddhist approach, I don't think is for everybody, is because it takes courage. You know, you're not going to, it takes courage. It's like therapy. You go into therapy, you're not just talking about the good stuff. You're going to you're talking about the hard stuff, right? So Buddhist approach or meditation is really, if we do it properly, it is therapy. And that is the main object. It needs to be therapeutic. It needs to be healing. And to be healing, then also, you talk about your problems with somebody. Why? Because that helps the healing, right? If you don't talk about it, or in this sense, you're having a conversation more with yourself. And it's non-judgmental, really it's about learning how to be your best friend, because there's a lot of shit that comes up. It's ugly. isn't it? So what are you going to do if it's all this ugliness? I mean, if it's your close friend coming to you and describing their ugliness that they're going through, you're not going to go, "Oh yeah, you're pathetic. I can't listen to this," right? No, that's too ugly. You're going to have empathy, right? You're going to have empathy, you're going to have warmth, you're going to have connection, you're going to have softness, you're going to have affection. That's what we need to do with ourselves. So many of us are so kind of taught to be so diligent and so competitive and so, I don't know, type A, right? So that if when we see the crap that comes up in our mind, we're very hard on ourselves because that's the way we've gone through, it's a formula. Excuse me. It's a formula, right? That we do. I mean, there are times when that formula works, toughen up, right? Don't complain. As they say in Australia, don't whinge. Okay. There is that. But my problem with that is it seems that many, many of us are sort of, you know, we're so hooked on that approach that we can't entertain that other approaches. So when you visit someone who's very much more evolved, as for me, is when you visit Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa, or these some other great lamas, or the Dalai Lama. It's not one size fits all. And one thing you will always feel, they may be harsh, they may be stern, but you always feel they're accepting. Always feel they're accepting. And we don't do that with ourselves. And because to be accepting means this this polluted mind I've got today is part of who I am, and I don't like it. And but to it doesn't mean to accept, it means accepting it means it just appears. So here we go into the why we really need to develop the wisdom side, why Buddhism talks about um, compassion without wisdom is like a bird trying to fly with one wing. So I many times hear my friends and other people, clients, have a lot of sense of, the compassion part is that, my mind is polluted, I'm really suffering, I'm so neurotic, all these things, but they don't have the wisdom side. Because for us now, we have to be very courageous. So I'm asking you, including myself, I want you to go into the crap. I want you to look at the crap in your mind. I want you to expose yourself. I want you to like look because we have to learn from it. The truth of suffering doesn't, we have to understand that the truth of suffering is something we need to incorporate into our practice. But we can't incorporate it when we don't have the wisdom side of it. Because what happens is when we open ourselves up to the polluted nature of our minds, you see all kinds of amazing, terrible things, right? It can be, right? So how do you not just get depressed? How do you not just give up? Well, because of the lack of wisdom, and wisdom will say, all of that arises within our mind, right? But it is not who we are. And that part seems to be often minimized in our practice. So we have to study the wisdom side, not just the relative side, but the absolute side. So relatively speaking, yes, our minds are a mess. And that's why what's meant by the truth of suffering. Okay? Is anyone following me? So when we stay only on the first noble truth, the truth of suffering, without incorporating the third noble truth, or the second and third, the cause, and then freedom being the fourth, uh, it's not so useful. It's just it's not only not useful, it's not accurate. So if we just stay on my mind is polluted, my mind is neurotic, um, my mind is bipolar, my mind is, attached, my mind is, like I said, neurotic, my mind is so messed up. If you stay there, it's not that useful. That is not Buddhist therapy. Buddhist therapy is coming in touch with all that, confronting whatever my neurosis is going to be a little different than yours. I have to sit with it. But okay, so what makes it a therapy is when you sit with it and you have an understanding of emptiness, of wisdom. So generally what we do, if you're in therapy or whatever, and you're talking about what's your problem is, so often in therapy, you become more and more identified with the problem. So now I'm a yeah, so I talk about depression and the therapist talks to you about depression. What happens? Okay. Tara, are you familiar with this? That if a therapist talks or psychologist talks with a client about depression in a particular way, the person gets more depressed. If a therapist talks about depression in a particular way that solidifies, and this is where we're different, okay? If it intensifies or solidifies or reaffirms, I'm a depressed person. I need to do something about it, right? From the Buddhist therapist point of view, that's okay, but that's not that great either. What's the curative process in Buddhist psychology is once the client or ourselves, when I say client, I mean us, right? When the client says, and the therapist says, "So how long you been depressed?" 3 years, or my whole life. And what do you do when you're depressed, right? Oh, I try to, I just stay in bed. Okay, and saying what do you do eventually? Eventually, you have to get, oh, I don't know, I get out of bed and I just go get some cornflakes, and I go back to bed. So those questions, that's a narrative, right? Though that narrative is very similar to what goes on in our heads. I shouldn't be so, I know I need to go out and exercise. If I exercise, I won't be depressed. I need to go eat something. I know if I eat something that'll help me. That whole thing. So from Buddhist therapy, from our therapy here, what we're talking about is, well, let me back up. So that approach in modern therapy, I mean, I'm generalizing, okay? So forgive me for that. But generally speaking, what's happening is okay, so we're talking about the depression, but for the Buddhist psychologist, she or he's interested in the subject, and the subject being I. So we have to look very carefully if the conversations we're having with others, our friends, our family, those we love about, things they're struggling with, whether depression or whatever it is, are when we're having the discussion, are we solidifying, concretizing the concept of I am a depressed person? So if I ask Taria, how long have you been depressed? And she says, 2 years. And I say, well, have you lost weight? Do you lose weight or do you eat? No, I don't eat. I don't like to eat. Well, do you go visit your friend? No, I don't like visiting friends when I'm feeling too. So that conversation, which is the same one we have in our head, right, is solidifying a sense of I. And that I is depression, right? It's almost melded totally, the identity and the experience. That is not helpful therapy. Helpful therapy would be to begin to understand that the subject and the emotion, the object, in this case, an emotion or feeling, are separate. So in meditation, what we need to do is when we watch depression. So that's what I was talking about earlier about staying to observing the neurosis of the mind, all the crap, the emotions, the afflictions, the secondary afflictions, jealousy, attachment, anger, all those things. The meditator who's using meditation as therapy is watching that and will also turn it and observe how his own sense of self-identity is clinging to that. I am depressed. So when we say I'm depressed, we're saying I am depression. Okay. And that becomes so, if that becomes too uh, sort of infused in the identity, the depressions, so all that stuff, when we're meditating, now what I really want to emphasize, when we're meditating, yes, you have to open up to the truth of suffering. I'm sorry, but do it in the right way. So the wrong way is, yes, we open up, and many meditators open up, they're watching their mind, and they see all these afflictions, all these neuroses, right? All these, envy and attachment and irritation, anger, and they see more, and it's coming up and coming up, and what we need to do, and then they become infused with it. They mold with it. Was it mold? Mold with it. Okay, that's not helpful. What is helpful is you to maintain as much as possible to when you're all the stuff's coming up in the mind, is that turn it around and now for a moment or two observe the subject. And when we observe the subject, there's a formula for that too, of course. And here's where the wisdom part comes. And we're not going to discuss it today. We can do this as another class, more focus. We then begin to investigate that subject. Like I feel like shit, right? I feel depressed. All this stuff's coming up in my mind. I feel worse. That's what happens sometimes, often with meditation, can happen with therapy or talking to friends. I feel worse. So here the unique quality of Buddhist therapy, Buddhist psychology is it's not about the object, the emotions, the afflictions, the depression. It's not really about that. It is about that. You can meditate on that too, the right way. But a quicker way is then turn it around and meditate on the who is it that's depressed? Because that's the person really feeling it, right? So from there, we need to have the right understanding of the nature of emptiness of that. So emptiness means simply that subject. It's very simple. That subject, I am depressed. We need to know so that just like we meditate, learn about the nature of the mind and the relative all the afflictions, we also learn about the nature of the subject. So there's only two things you need to meditate ever on: all the objects and the subject. The subject being just one. So that subject also doesn't exist the way it appears. So the point of view of the emptiness of it is empty of existing the way it appears. So we have to first become familiar with, well, how does it appear? It appears as something solid. I am this, right? Don't insult me. Okay. Don't criticize me. Don't challenge me. That whatever it is, that me is the girl or the guy you want to analyze. Now, that girl or that guy, that subject, that I will appear as three. Well, this is not the deepest explanation, but it's the one that start with, and it's deep enough. That I, that subject, is going to appear to us as number one, something that exists independently on its own. And so, what we do is we meditate on this I first, not the emptiness of it, but to first meditate on how it appears. And how it appears in three ways. It'll appear as an independent entity. Okay. It'll appear as something that's fixed, permanent, and unchanging. And it'll appear as something that has no parts to it. It's like a monolithic thing, single entity. Don't meditate on the falsity of that before you meditate for some weeks, months, maybe even, on that the habitual nature of my mind sees my sense of self, my personality, my identity as something existing on its own, completely independent, something that exists without changing, it's permanent, and something that exists without parts. It's not good at, I'm not good, I don't mean to say it that way, but that's so when we talk about emptiness, all we're saying is it's empty of being those three things. When you don't see those three things, when you see the identity not independent but dependent, when you see the identity as not permanent but impermanent, changing, when you see the identity as not partless but full of parts, that's emptiness because it's empty of the other. So emptiness is not a thing, okay? It's not a thing, it's the absence of something. We have the experience of emptiness by having the experience of those three qualities. When we see all of a sudden that the I or the subject, the identity is not something independent but dependent, what happens to that sense of I? Can you imagine? Right? It completely falls apart. That's that I that falls apart. That's the I that's depressed. That's the I that's jealous. That's the I that's irritated. That's the I that doesn't feel good today. Because the body also, body, mind, all that stuff. Does that make sense? Senseless? Everyone's so quiet. I don't know if it makes sense or not. Anybody want to say something? Tell me how wrong I am? It's a quiet. It's not fair. How come I have to do all the talking? Tyler, you must have something.
I always got something to say, Karuna.
Good. Help me out.
Well, I see it as a good antidote, and I'm happy you gave that to us today.
Okay, good.
Um, it's helpful
Yeah,
because,
and
yeah, that it just makes sense. I do identify with a lot of the things I do, whether it be overeating, seeking stimulants, caffeine for happiness, and all
yeah.
this different stuff. I really identify it because I've had I've had that problem for a long time.
Mm,
And so I feel really identified with that.
good. Yeah,
So,
I think that shift, the beginning of that shift is very powerful.
hmm
And then it goes, of course, all the way deeper, 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 all the way to enlightenment, right?
hmm
And yeah. Anybody else? Quentin? Quentin?
He's shrugging.
Well, he came in late.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say though,
Yeah.
like focusing on one part of the emptiness has been more helpful for me recently, like just impermanence instead of because I've been striving so much to understand emptiness itself,
Yeah.
like the totality of it. And just right now working with impermanence seems to be more helpful of the moment of everything being impermanent seems to help to release more
Hmm.
not only my identity, but the experience of depression or anxiety of a moment. Um, Instead of trying to go through all the steps of emptiness,
Right.
just seeing it more as being impermanent.
Yeah. I agree. For me too. That's been the strongest key. What happens for me is so when we talked in the very beginning about watching the mind, like the mind itself, all the teachings are there, right? And what I found, I don't know if Jessica found the same or other people, that when we're watching, so impermanence, so whatever topic we take, it's right there. Remember, I said that in the beginning of our talk. So let's take impermanence. So what happens is, as you watch the mind, all of a sudden you have this aha experience. You're watching everything's moving, right? There's nothing fixed. And
Mm.
so then it becomes, then you think about the I. It's also moving, although it appears fixed, right? That's why we talk about those three qualities of independence, permanence, and partless. So the permanence one is you go, wow, if everything's moving, and like if everything's moving, what we do is say, I'm happy. Then the next thought comes, I'm tired. The next thought, I'm hungry. Well, if all that's happening, then that I has to be impermanent, right? So and doesn't that help loosen that fixed sense of I, right? I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, and also the attachment to the experience I'm having in the
Right.
moment too.
Right. Right. Because you can't, it's like trying to, it's like trying to freeze or hold a river that's flowing by.
Right.
You try and grab this water, this part of the water, and that part of the water. It's like that's what we do. It's kind of ridiculous when you think about
Yeah.
it. But that's what ignorance is, right?
Yeah.
And that ignorance is synonymous with suffering. Not all that other suffering is not all that other stuff, really. Those are byproducts.
Yeah.
Marilyn, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm enjoying this. I have a mind that's kind of all or nothing. And focusing, you say, don't focus on your faults either, because that's an ego mind too. That's
Mhm.
defining who I am
Mhm.
and defining other people, which is even worse. So I like the fact that we're supposed to take a look and we have ways to do it.
Right.
That's what I'm happy about.
Yeah, I want to just highlight that we're not familiar with that, but Lama Yeshe's saying that is the practice. Do it. Engage with the crap and don't be judgmental. Try not to be judgmental. It's like it's just learning. It's like looking at art. Some art is not appealing. Some art is appealing, and it's subjective, right?
Yes.
But they often talk about be like a child in a museum.
Mm,
Child just observing. It's not going so conceptual and analytical. Now there is good analysis, but at our, right now, the level of analysis, we do want a little bit, but the analysis should be very refined. It should be simple. Like, you know, are these thoughts happiness? Are they not happy? They should be learning analysis, but not judgmental. It's so hard not to be judgmental.
oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's our big challenge. And then,
Yep.
okay. Okay. Anything else? Um, so I will head off. I'm so sorry, everyone, about my schedule mess ups. Usually I'm a little better, but anyway, I'm very bad. See, should be judgmental. Uh, so Tyler, we are meeting next week.
Yeah, I looked at the schedule. It's the 29th, and then Taria was right, July 20th as well.
Okay.
For
And
now.
then,
So yeah, that's what's on the
and I'd
schedule.
like to at some point have a conversation with everybody about what you would like to. So this series will end basically on the 29th of July, right?
On the
I
20th
mean,
of
20th.
July.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is kind of weird. Sorry, it's been really weird schedule. And then I think we're going to start up again after my schedule eases up at the end of August, and then I should be around. So I do apologize for the inconsistency, but also at the same time, I'd like to know if people would like to continue. I was mentioning that there's a lot of uh, different things we could do. We can continue with this book, but then there's also more formal kind of books that have come out in recent years with Lama. And we can just think about. So if people want to continue, and I think that we'll make this, we'll try and keep it going if it's useful, right?
yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
If you'd like Karuna, and if everybody would like this, we could send an email out to
Yeah.
all the participants too. If
Yeah.
you want to formulate some questions or
Yeah.
right, any material desires or anything like that.
So why don't, if people can think, maybe they can't think, but we'll bring it up again next week, and then we'll
Sure.
we'll do what we can, and then continue to. I like to, if we continue it as a consistent thing, then I think we'll get more people participating, hopefully.
Sure.
Not that I mind that this group is a good group. So, uh, yeah. Okay. Well, everyone enjoy your Sunday.
Yep. Thanks, Karuna.
See you
Thank
next
you.
week. Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody. Karuna,
Right.
thanks for making the time to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you for being flexible with my ridiculous calendar keeping.
Hey, it's all good. It was kind of a power hour for me, so it's really great, you know.
Wasn't there a Christian show, The Hour of Power or something?
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
All right,
See you
everybody.
soon.
Carrie.
Thank you.
Oh, and if
Bye.
anybody had asked, I believe I saw a request to record. This meeting's being recorded, and then we're uploading everything to the YouTube channel. So
Great.
you can keep an eye
Finally.
for it there. Yeah,
Finally.
we've been working on it. So
Good.
yeah, it's
Okay.
happening.
Thank you.
All right, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Let's see. Let's do this.